What we're going to be looking at tonight, if you have a chance to open up that week 3, we're going to be looking at commands that really are going to begin to make your life easier from the CAD standpoint. And what we have, we're going to talk about objects and object selection. So that's going to be the first critical part, because as you begin to do these edits that we're going to get into, you need to know how to select objects. Okay, so we'll talk about object selection, selection sets, and then we're going to get into these areas called object snaps. So you're going to love these guys because object snaps, or what are called O snaps traditionally, are going to basically take coordinates out of your hands. So not that coordinates understanding aren't important. I think you guys are starting to realize the importance of all of that. But what this does is it allows you to not have to deal with coordinates as much, and allows AutoCAD or lets AutoCAD take more of the burden. So then we're going to get into these edit commands, also referred to as modify commands today. We're going to look at erase and oops, undo, redo. And the reason I kind of have them like with a slash between them is because they're somewhat inverses of each other. Okay. And then we're going to look at move and copy. So move and copy do similar things, just they do it differently. And then we're going to look at fillet. I probably will skip chamfer tonight, because we're not going to even mess with chamfer, but we may, I may come back to that, and then I'll do offset. So these are going to be, these commands right here are going to be just incredibly nice. You're going to like what they do for you. They're, like I said, they're going to make your work a lot simpler as you get into this. So then what I'll probably do is just go over this concept of surveyor's units, this bearing concept on Wednesday when I introduce the lab. So it may not take the whole time tonight, but as we get into this, if you have questions, stop me, and then we can work through it. Okay, so let me go ahead and fire up AutoCAD. And if you have AutoCAD available, you might want to fire it up as well to go through this with me. Okay, so give me a sec. I thought I had that already fired up, and obviously I didn't. So while this is coming together, okay, here we go. So you can just go ahead, because we're just going to be working in a generalized drawing. So the first thing we're going to look at are object selections. So dealing with objects, so there's two things: object selection and then what are called selection sets. So with object selection, first of all, what you're saying is you have an object down there on your screen that you want to somehow manipulate or grab or whatever. So you have to have like something there. Right now I have nothing to select, so I couldn't use any of these techniques. But when we do have objects and we want to select them, there's a couple of ways of doing it. The first method is called noun-verb, and then the second method is called verb-noun selection. So what you're talking about with noun-verb, noun would be the object that you're trying to select. So like if I have a circle, for instance, let's say, I'm just going to kind of show you what I mean by that process. Oops, I'm going to put 2 circles down. So what noun-verb says is you go out and you select the circle first. You notice that the circle is now highlighted. That tells you it's selected. And then I initiate the verb, which would be like, say, delete. So if I would type in E and then hit enter, it gets rid of it. Okay, so that's what we call noun-verb selection. So the other method, let me move this guy over here real quick. The other method is to do what's called verb-noun selection. So what that says is you actually execute the verb command. Primarily, you're talking about one of these guys up here. So for instance, if I say erase, and then AutoCAD comes back and it says, okay, select objects. So the first aspect, when I selected erase, that's your verb. And then when you're selecting objects, that's your noun. Okay, so once I do that, and then I hit enter. So there's slightly different methods to how you're executing this. You have more flexibility when you do verb-noun selection, and but it's sometimes quicker to do noun-verb. Okay, so you kind of want to know how to do both methods. Okay, so if you have a your screen open and you want to follow me, I'm going to draw a couple different types of objects so you can see how this works. So let's go ahead. We're going to just draw a couple of lines. I'm just going to do a couple of lines like this. Don't worry about where they are, just so that they kind of look like mine. And I'm going to put a circle here, maybe a polyline. Also, because of the types of objects that you have there, the way you select them will be different too. Oops, I don't know what's going on with that. All right. And I might just put another object down, just a real quick rectangle. Okay, so I have objects here. So if I want to select these using noun-verb selection, I have basically a couple different methods. The first method is called your pick box. So your pick box is the little box that exists in the middle of the crosshair. So notice at my command line, it doesn't say anything. So that allows me to just come here and select. I'm just left clicking, left clicking, left clicking, and left clicking. So anything I'm putting my pick box on and then left clicking, that's going to select it. Okay, so that's called a pick box selection. If you don't want those as your selection, then you can just hit the escape key and it will clear it. So whatever is selected is called your selection set. So like right now I have nothing selected. So I have a null or a 0 selection set. And before I probably had 4 or 5 objects. Okay, is everybody getting the idea of that? Just the pick box selection? Any questions?
Nope, got it.
Okay, so there's another type of selection that occurs with this called implied windowing. Okay, so you have 2 types of windows that you can select with. And so these are ways of, instead of selecting with a pick box, which is laborious if you have, let's say you have 1,000 objects. You don't want to pick 1,000 times with your selection tool because it take you forever. So there's ways of surrounding these objects with either a window of some type, and then it will select it. So the way this works is if you take your pick box and you don't select an object, okay, so if I pick it on here and select that object, he's selected, okay? But if I take my pick box in an area that doesn't have an object and I left click, why is that doing that? Hold on a minute. My thing's doing all kinds of things. If I just left click, now what should happen is if I drag it this way, you notice I get a green looking window. And if I drag it this way, I get a blue looking window. So when you take it to the right, this gives you what's called a window selection. That's what that blue indicates. And when you take it to the green side, this is called a crossing selection. So the way these work is a little different. If you're going to do a window selection, the object that you're going to select has to be completely encompassed by that window or inside of it. So like right now, if I cross through this object and do another left click, notice it doesn't select anything. But if I come over here and do it like that, it gets the circle and it got the line because those guys were both inside of it. Has everybody seen how that works? So you can use it to exclude things, but also to select things, but they have to be completely surrounded by that window. And it's always going to be a rectangle, okay? So again, pick a point, drag it to the right, and what it selects, notice anything that it completely surrounds, it selects, all right? So if you've done that, go ahead and hit the escape key and that'll kill your selection. I'm going to do one more thing to clean my screen up a little bit. Okay, so if we go the other direction, this is called a crossing window. So if I click this way, so this one's slightly different. What happens is anything that window crosses through, it will select. It doesn't have to surround it. So notice as I kind of drag through it, the objects kind of start getting a little bit highlighted. And notice by just coming over here and left clicking, it selected everything that window crossed through. So it can be dangerous because you can select things that you're not paying attention to. And that can be a downside. Okay? So that's called a crossing. And this process is called implied windowing. So again, if you pick nothing and you go to the right, you get a window. If you go to the left, you get a crossing. That's the process of implied windowing. Is everybody getting the idea of that? That's a really kind of a slick thing.
Yes.
All right, so there's another one out there that I don't like. It's called a lasso, and it works the same way. If you pick a point and you hold down, you get this kind of thing develops. See, it's more irregular. That's called a lasso. Okay, and it works the same way. If you go one direction, it's a window lasso, and if you go the other way, it's a crossing lasso. I'm not a real fan of the lasso, but you know, some people really like it. All right. So when you are doing noun verb selection, which is what we're doing right now, that's really all the choices. You basically have your pick box selection, which is one object at a time, or you have the implied windowing, which gives you a window, or it gives you a crossing, or if you hold it down, you get the lasso window or the lasso crossing. Okay. So when you have, let's go ahead and do this. I'll just show this to everybody. So go ahead and just select everything, if you will. If you're following me, oops. I'm going to just try to get everything on my screen. So let's say you have everything selected, but you don't want everything in your selection set. So what you can do is deselect it. So it's real easy to do. You just hold the shift key down, and then you just select the object you don't want. So I can just shift, select that, or I can shift and I can do a crossing and do the same thing. Okay. So if something's selected and you hold the shift key down, then it deselects it. And if you don't hold the shift key down, then it selects it. So you can go back and forth. Okay. So that's what we call noun verb selection. All right, so you are somewhat limited. You just have those really 2 or 3 options. So if you go to verb noun selection, you have more tools that you can use. There's, besides the pick box, you also have some other ones. Let me flip over to my, my little drawing thing here, and I'm going to give you a couple of them. So for verb noun selection, I don't know why it's doing that. Let me see what's going on here. All right, maybe this isn't going to work for me in a minute. All right, so you have pick box, that's your one thing. And you also have a window. Well, let me back that up. You have the implied window. Either the implied window or the implied crossing. And then you have just what's called a window. You also have a crossing window. You have a window polygon. You have a crossing polygon. You can select every object by typing in the word all, which is great, or it can be dangerous depending how you want to do it. You can also do what's called last. You can do one of my favorite ones, it's called a fence. And there's a few other ones, but these are the major ones. Okay, so noun verb selection just has this right here. Noun verb has pick box and implied windowing. But verb noun has all of these. Okay, so there's a big difference in the way you can select things. And when you're doing these guys are just like we just talked about, but when you want to do like a window, you type in W, or you type in C for crossing. You type in WP for window poly, or CP for crossing poly. You have to type in the word all, L for last, and F for fence. Okay. And again, like I said, there's more of these little guys, but we're not going to use all of them. So let's take a look at these. So if you've got your objects selected like I do now, just go ahead and dump them by hitting the escape key. That'll always terminate your selection set. So when you're doing verb noun selection, you have to select a verb type of command. So we're just going to simply go in and do the erase command just because it's simple. And so notice what it says. It says select. Well, I'll tell you, yeah, that's fine. So we've got select objects. So notice erase is a little different in the way it looks, but if you take your pick box, it selects. If you do an implied window, it selects. Okay, so we can see how that works. That works exactly the same way. Let's go ahead and hit the escape key. So now I'll show you how some of these other ones work. So if you go into erase, and this time you type in W and hit enter, it'll say, okay, give me the first corner of a window. So what this does is you pick a point, and notice this way I can drag it either way and it remains a window. Okay, so what I'm doing is I'm forcing a window. So if I do it like that, there's my window. If I type in C and hit enter, now I'm forcing a crossing. So if I go this way, there's my crossing, or if I go C this way, so I can go either way, all right? So the difference is that with the implied window, right is a window, left is a crossing, but when you're typing in a W or a C, it's staying left or right. It doesn't matter, okay? So we're going to go ahead and just hit the escape key because we're not going to actually execute these. All right, so the W poly, the window polygon, and the crossing polygon, they're kind of like lassos. They're a little bit, I think they're a little bit friendlier, but if I went into the erase command and I type in WP for window poly and then hit enter, what this allows me to do is pick a point, and notice what it's doing is it's building a polygon based on the location of where I'm just clicking points in with my mouse, and when I'm done I would just hit enter. So anything that's surrounded there got selected. If I go for CP for crossing polygon, it works exactly the same way. So it's kind of like a lasso. I think it's a little bit friendlier than a lasso. In fact, it existed before a lasso did. So there you have that. Okay, those are your options there. Okay, so you got the rectangular window and the rectangular crossing, or you got the polygon window and crossing. Okay. So the other one that's kind of important is the one that's called the all option. So go ahead, if you haven't deselected everything, just hit the escape key, and that'll kill everything. So I'm going to go into the erase command, and I'm going to type in the word all, A-L-L, and hit enter. So as you can see, it has selected everything. Now, the thing is, this is pretty dangerous, is that it selects not only everything, but everything in your database. So even things that aren't visible now got selected. And of course, if I'm doing erase right now, if I hit enter, I just deleted my whole drawing. Okay, so you want to be really, really careful with all. But it's very important for some command or some things that you do. Like if you have to move your whole drawing from one position to another, it's very convenient to select everything using the all option, because you make sure that you get everything. Now, it is possible to protect objects, and we'll probably be talking about that, I think, next week. Up here in these things called layers, you can protect objects. So even though they're visible on the screen, they're not selectable. And in that case, all will not be able to grab those objects. Okay, so you kind of have to look at that. So the fence is kind of a really cool command. It's an easy way of selecting objects. It's kind of like drawing lines, and basically anything the line crosses through, it selects. So you can think of it as a one-dimensional crossing instead of 2 dimensions. It's, again, probably one of my favorite tools because it's real quick. So if we go to the erase command and we type in F for fence, and then you can just notice whatever it crosses through, it selects. Now, if you completely surround an object with a fence, it won't select it because it has no area to it. So you can notice that it didn't do anything there. Okay. So the fence is a really, really awesome little tool. So the other one that I put on there was called last. Last will select the last object that you created, okay, from a time standpoint. So one of these objects here was the last object I created. I think it was my rectangle. So if I go into, again, the erase command and I type in L and hit enter, notice it selected that object. So that's also a pretty convenient little tool. I use that quite a bit. If I generated something and then I want to rotate it real quickly, I just generate the object and then I go into the rotate command and then L and enter, and I don't have to select anything. So the virtue of that is some of these things you don't have to select, okay? So again, these are these guys we're talking about here: pick box, implied windowing, implied crossing, window crossing, window polygon, crossing polygon, all last, fence. There's more of them, but I showed you the major ones that you need, and you don't have to worry about them. Now there is one thing that you do want to think about is what's called add and remove mode. So normally when you are building a selection set, you are adding objects to that selection set, but you can also take them away. So for instance, let's go to the erase and just type in the word all and hit enter. So what it's done is it's selected every object. Now, if you want to remove objects, you might remember I said I can hold the shift key and then select it like that with a pick box, but you can also make it say down here, instead of select object, you can have it say remove objects. So if you type in an R and hit enter, now it says remove objects. So now you don't have to hold the shift key. You just hit it with a pick box, or you hit it with a whatever you've got going on. So there's two modes, the add mode and the remove mode, and you notice I'm in the remove mode. So now if I shift, now I'm going into actually that isn't working. Guess it doesn't. So anyway, if I want to go back to the add mode, then I have to type in A and hit enter, and that actually, yeah, that changes it back. So now that I'm in an add mode, now it's back to normal, okay? So you always start out in an add mode, and you can then remove objects from a secondary standpoint, but all of your crossings, pick box, last, they all work the same way, whether they're in remove mode or add mode. It's just the way that goes, okay? So those are called selections of objects. We have the two methods of doing it: noun verb selection, verb noun selection. Again, you have more flexibility with verb noun selection than you do with noun verb, okay? But from my standpoint, I do selections both ways. It just depends on what I'm doing and what I think about. There are, by the way, some of these commands up here that will not let you select multiple objects. So if it says select object, the only thing you can use is a pick box. Okay, so there are a few of those that do not allow multiple selection sets. Okay, anybody have any questions? I'm going to hit the escape key and just cancel out of there.
Nope.
Any questions on any of those? Okay. Well, we're going to then move to what are called object snaps. Okay, what we typically do is refer to these as O snaps. So if you go down to your status bar down here on that part of the screen, you'll notice this little guy. It's probably turned on. It looks like a rectangle, and it kind of has like a highlighted part in the top left corner of that. If you drop this little arrow down, you will notice this should pop up for you. Is everybody getting that to pop up?
Yep.
Okay, so those are called object snaps. So object means they're related to objects on the screen, and snap is really a kind of saying coordinate, okay? So what this is, these are tools that will harvest coordinates from objects that exist. So for instance, if I want to know what the endpoint of that line is, I don't have to know it. All I have to do is know that I've got an endpoint O snap, and it'll find it for me, or a midpoint, or a center. So there's quite a few. So let's look at these guys real quick. First of all, there's two ways of using O snaps. You can either use them in what's called a running mode, which means they're on all the time, or you can do what's called an override mode, which means you're going to initiate that O snap when you want it, okay? Both things are valuable, all right? From my standpoint, as you're learning these, I think you want to be careful with running O snaps, because sometimes they will grab coordinates that you're not really aware of, not paying attention to, and then you can get things displaced if you're not careful. So from a standpoint of actually learning this, you probably want to learn how to do overriding O snaps, which I'll show you. I'll show you how to do both methods. So if you have your little box that popped up here, you may notice that some of these guys have a check in front of them. If they do, like I've got midpoint, node, and intersection highlight or checked, that means those guys are running. So that means they're on all the time. Now, in order for them to be running, this box has to be lit up. So if I turn it off, I've just turned off all of my O-snaps. Doesn't mean I still can't get to them, but they're just not running, okay? So open that back up. So let's take a look at, and we're not going to look at all of these. I'm going to look at just some of the major ones for you. So the first one is called an endpoint. So that will snap to an object that has endpoints. So really most of the objects that we've talked about so far have endpoints with the exception of a circle. So a line has endpoints, a polyline has endpoints, which happens to be the vertexes. So even on this guy, which is a closed polygon, the vertexes are going to be endpoints. Okay, arcs have endpoints. Points do not have endpoints. We've talked about those. So every other object has endpoints. So if an object has an endpoint, then it also has a midpoint. So on a line between the two endpoints, you're going to have a midpoint. On a polyline, with each segment, you're going to have a midpoint. So it's not just the midpoint of the total polyline. Okay, so circles will reference this center guy. So actually ellipses will also, we haven't talked about an ellipse, but there's an object called an ellipse that also has this. But if you use a center, what that'll do is snap to the center of the circle. So you just touch the circle and it will find the geometric center for you. That's what that's doing. This guy called geometric center will snap to something that's irregular or something that isn't like a circle. So for instance, it used to be if I wanted the center of this polygon here, I couldn't find it very easily. I would have to draw two diagonal lines, and where those crossed, that was my geometric center. This guy is a new snap, so he'll snap to that now because of the way that works. Node, oh, by the way, that has to be closed. So even though this is called a polygon right here, maybe that's an open polygon, you wouldn't have a geometric center. So it has to be a closed polygon. And it typically is going to have to be a P-line, okay? A node will snap to a point object. So you might recall we haven't used the point object yet, but the point object is the one that was located at, we went over that last week. That's over here. Okay, so that will only snap, that only snaps to a point object. So a quadrant is a little bit tricky, but that quadrant snaps to the 4 quadrant points of a circle or an arc. So what that means is that where you have your x-axis and your y-axis cross through a circle, you're going to get a quadrant. So I'm going to have one here, one there, and one there. So those are going to generate always 4 quadrants. Now, an arc is a little trickier. Let me walk over here a minute. So I'm just going to clear this up and just show you arcs are a little trickier because of the way they work. So if I have an arc object, okay, there's an arc, not a very good one, but so let me try to get a little bit better arc. Okay, that's a little bit better. So if you have a circle, you have 4 quadrants, but if you envision that there's an axis through this thing, then where the x-axis and the y-axis comes through this, there's a quadrant. So there's a quadrant here on this arc, and there's a quadrant here, but you wouldn't have a quadrant out here and a quadrant out here. So an arc, depending on the size of the arc and where it crosses these axes coming through the center point, you can either have 4 quad points on a circle, or an arc rather, or you can have none, because if this arc was smaller, if this arc was trimmed off this way, and just this piece was left right in here, you would have no quads on it. So quadrants are a little bit tricky. Also, I want you to understand quadrant is not the same thing as tangent. Okay, tangent means it would only touch that arc or circle in one spot. There is a tangent option here. Notice there's your tangent option. So tangent will work anytime with an arc and a circle, but it will be tangent specifically to that point. Okay. Intersection. Intersection is a really cool one. That allows you to snap to objects that cross or that cross mathematically. So what that means that they cross mathematically, if you notice on my picture right here, nothing crosses really physically. But if you notice, this line is kind of looking in this direction, and this line is looking in this direction. If we extend those lines out far enough, they're going to intersect somewhere in space. And this command will actually find that, which is really kind of cool, the way that works. I'm gonna skip a couple of these. Perpendicular allows you to snap from an object or to an object perpendicular. So in other words, I can put a line out here and snap into that perpendicular. And we're going to do all of these here in a minute. So we're going to see how these work. Nearest, what that will do is that will guarantee that you are going to be touching an object, but it doesn't guarantee exactly where you are. So in other words, I can have a line somewhere on this object nearest to where I select it, but it doesn't guarantee exactly where it is. Like it's not going to be a midpoint or it's not going to be an end point. Okay. So what I'd like you to do, we're going to look at O snaps, and we're going to first turn these guys off. So if you have any O snaps on, just go ahead and turn them all off. Okay. So that we are completely limited to override O snaps. And let's just go ahead and you can clean your screen up if you want. Just go ahead and grab everything and then delete it. So you can just select everything and then hit your delete key, or you can select everything and hit the E key and then hit enter twice. Okay. So I'm gonna put a couple of objects up here just so we can kind of see how this works. I didn't like what I had before, so I just kind of want to make sure I got a couple. So I'm gonna have a, let's put a line kind of over here. We'll put a circle here, and maybe we'll put a rectangle here. Okay. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to draw a line from the midpoint of this circle, or I'm sorry, from the midpoint of this line to the center of this circle to the geometric center of this guy, because this is a rectangle. So I drew a line, a circle, and a rectangle, okay? So I'm going to go into the line command, and so right now it asks me to specify a first point. So notice when I come up here, there should be no little green object popping out, okay? If that's happening, then you didn't turn this off down here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab an O snap, and the way I do this is I hit the shift key and then I right click on my mouse, and this O snap menu pops up. And what I'm looking for here is the one that's called midpoint. So I just left click midpoint, and then I come over here and I just touch that object anywhere, and it shows me this little green symbol. And notice this symbol is a triangle, and then it'll have that word midpoint. Once I see that, all I have to do is left click. I don't even have to drag my cursor down there, and notice it goes directly to that. Okay, is that working for everybody that's trying this? Okay, so now we're going to go to the center of the circle, and what we would do is we would again hit a shift, right click, and we're going to go to center, select the circle. Notice you get that green symbol pops to it. Okay, and then I'm going to come up here, do a shift, right click, and I'm going to find that one called geometric center, and then I'm going to select that rectangle. All right, and now I can go back. If I want to go to the end point, then I would hit shift, right click, and end point. So you'll notice that as you do an O snap, each O snap that you do has its own symbol. Okay, after a while you'll start to recognize those. So the circle is a little green circle, the end point is a little green square, the midpoint is a green triangle, and they also will have those little O snap names that pop up. So those are also really, really cool. Okay, is everybody seeing how those work? Those are called overrides. So what we're doing is we're grabbing that as we want it. It's not happening automatically for us. Okay, is everybody good with that? Okay, I'm gonna erase exactly what we just did, and I want to show you the difference if you're using running O snaps. Okay, so we're going to now go to the O snap, and we're going to select midpoint, center, and geometric center. So you're going to have midpoint, center, geometric center, and then you're going to turn this button on, so make sure that that's blue. So now when you go to the line command, you don't have to do anything. You just click the line, click the circle, and click the rectangle. Actually now, there's what's happened there. It went to a midpoint and it really overrode what I actually wanted it to do. Okay, so you have to be careful when you have running O snaps. Okay, so it's a little bit quicker if you're using running O snaps, and they're certainly great tools, but you got to be careful how you're using them. Okay, is everybody okay with that?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so I'm going to show you. I want to show you a couple other ones that are really neat, because these are going to just basically take coordinates right out of our hands. Okay, we're not going to need to. I mean, you're going to still have to know a little bit about your coordinates. Certainly, you have to know a little bit about your coordinate system, but you don't have to deal with calculating coordinates anymore. That's what these guys are doing for you, by and large. Okay, so they work 90% of the time for you. Okay. So let's try a couple of these other ones, which are going to be really neat. Let's go ahead and we're just going to clean this up. Go ahead, if you've got that, just grab everything and hit the delete key on your keyboard, or you can hit enter twice. And I'm going to do a zoom extent. So I'm going to show you some other ones that are really nice. So we're going to generate a circle over here and a smaller circle here. Oops. Or you can go big or small, I really don't care. So what I'm going to show you is how tangency works and the difference between tangent and the quadrant, so that you know the difference. So if you go to the line command, and notice it's going to want to do one of these other ones that we've got turned on. I want to do a tangent, so I'm going to hit the shift, right click, and I'm going to go to tangent, and I'm going to select this first circle. Now notice when I've done that, wherever my cursor goes, it's forming that line tangent. So it's following me around tangent, which is really cool. So now I'm going to do another shift right click and go to tangent to get the second tangent. Okay, and now that line is perfectly tangent. Tangent to that circle, tangent to that circle. Okay, now we're going to do that slightly different. I want you to notice that this isn't going to be the same thing. I'm going to go to line, and I'm going to hit a shift right click, and I'm going to go quadrant, bottom quadrant, to quadrant. Okay, so you can clearly see that this is tangent. This line's tangent to those circles because it's only touching that circle in one spot. But quadrant's not the same thing at all. What quadrant is doing is giving me a line that's coming through here twice. So that's actually what you would call a secant line. So the reason I wanted to show you that, because tangent is not the same thing in any way, shape, or form of the same thing as a tangent, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and just delete this guy. So what we're going to also do now, I want you to draw a couple of lines for me. Do a line like this. And we're going to do a line like this. Now just make sure that the lines are not parallel. That will be really kind of hard for you to do, and don't make them cross, okay? We're just going to look like this. So what we're going to do is, these things are not crossing physically, but mathematically we should realize, and I think everybody does, is that these guys will cross. If you extend this guy infinity this direction and infinity in this direction, eventually they're going to cross. So we have the one out there that's called intersection. An intersection will find that point where they touch. So what I'm going to do is go to a circle. I'm going to do what's called a circle radius. Circle radius. And so it wants to know the center point. Well, I don't know where it is, but I want it to be the intersection of these two guys. So I'm going to hit a shift, right click, and I'm going to go to intersection, select that guy, and then select this guy. And notice what it did is it found that circle's location based on where those guys would select. And then I want to make it as big as, let's say, the end point of that, the radius. So there, I've got it right there. So if I extend this line in and extend that line in, it's going to hit that intersection point, that center point. So that's a really, really sharp tool. Okay, So basically, again, I'm just using lines and circles and things like that, but all of these objects we've talked about, they all can be used with OSNAP. So, you know, you're not limited to any object types per se, unless it's like a point. The only thing that'll snap to a point is a node type of OSNAP. Okay, so there are some limitations, but most of them aren't limited. So let's take a look at perpendicular. Perpendicular is really cool. So if I draw a line, let's say I want to draw a line that's perpendicular to this line right here. So I could just pick a point right here, and then notice I don't know where that perpendicular is, but if I hit a shift right click, I can snap it perpendicular. Notice when I get that perpendicular symbol, there it is right there. So that's called perpendicular to. So I put the line out here first, and then I did this. There's a perpendicular from. If I go here and then go to perpendicular, and then select that object, notice what it's doing is that object is now perpendicular anywhere I want to place it. I could place it, let's say, right there. So both of those lines are perpendicular. This one was perpendicular to the object. This one was perpendicular from the object. So let's see what happens when we snap a circle perpendicular. So if I go into a line and I snap perpendicular to that circle, well, let me see. Let me do a line. I want to place it out here first. I want to place a line right there. Then I want to snap it perpendicular. So what this does is it makes it what we call a radial line. So if I extend that line in, what it's going to do is it's going to go through the center point. Okay. So a perpendicular to an arc or a circle will be what we call a radial line, where these will be truly 90 degrees between like two lines, or polyline and those kind of things. Is everybody getting the idea of OSNAPs? Because they're going to be really, really important to how we take a look at all of this as we get going. Any questions on those?
If I have it perpendicular to the circle and I draw the line through the circle, would that find the center of the circle if I did the midpoint too?
So first of all, midpoint won't work with a circle because there is no midpoint, okay? But I think if I followed you is that, let me just do this, Ian, okay? So you're saying you're starting a point right here, like that?
Or no, I'm doing the, would you have it for, what was it? We had it, it was an intersection. When we had the line that goes around the circle, I think we did.
You mean a tangent like this one?
Yeah, sure. I think, yeah, we'll go with that. Yeah, it's tangent. That's right. Yes.
Well,
and
this line's tangent. Okay.
Yes, and then we cut it through the circle, and then we would hit we call it the midpoint. We hit shift midpoint. Would we find the midpoint of the circle, or would that be the line?
The circle doesn't have a midpoint.
Or not the circle have a midpoint, but the center of the circle, I guess.
All right. This is not going to ever find a center of a circle. Now, if you drew a line perpendicular from the end point of that line, that would take you to the center of the circle.
Okay.
Okay, so this line that's perpendicular, well, let me just show you. If I drew a line, let's say from this end point, well, I can't really do it easily, but in other words, if I drew a line, let's say out here somewhere and perpendicular to that line at its end point there, that would be that would go through the circle center. Okay. Is that making sense?
Mm-hmm.
But if I take a line, now watch this. If I take a line out here and just pick a point, notice this is just coming in at any funky angle. If I do a shift right click and snap that guy perpendicular to the circle, that line, if you extend that line will go through the center of the circle. Is that making sense?
Yes.
So if I do another line, make it perp, You notice how those are all what we call coming in radial? You see that?
Mm-hmm.
Now watch what I'm going to do here. I'm going to extend these guys. I think this will work. You see how they all extended to the same point?
Yeah.
And that point was the center. Okay, does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. So I hope I was clear on that. Okay. Okay. Anybody else? These guys are going to get easier as you use them, but they are going to be kind of like your best friend because they're going to be really important as you get into drawing stuff. Okay. All right. So we're going to let me just walk over here a minute. We're going to take a look at a couple of commands here. I'm going to do a little drawing so we can kind of go through these. So the first one is the erase. And its kind of opposite is what's called the oops. Now, the oops doesn't exist as a command out on the ribbon anywhere, so you have to type that in, okay? Erase, it has an alias of E. So that's really nice, and you can also use the delete key, okay? But this one, you have to completely type this in to get to it. So there's no, that one's kind of an older command. So let's take a look at this. So notice, here's the erase command if you're looking on the keyboard, or the ribbon, or you can type in E and hit enter, or you can hit the delete key on your keyboard, but you have to have something selected when you hit the delete key. So for instance, if I just go out here and select objects like this using noun verb selection, and then I hit the delete key, it takes them out. Okay, so that's an easy way of doing it. If you do verb noun selection, you have a little bit more choice. So if I come up here with the erase, and then what I can do is just pick an object, pick the object, pick those objects, and pick that object. Once I select those objects, then I just hit enter and it takes them out. Okay? So it's a little safer doing it verb noun because you kind of see what it's going to take out before you actually do it. If you just like select stuff and then you hit the delete key, you lose things. Okay? You got seeing how that works? Pretty simple.
Yep.
Now, let me ask anybody knows this. Are all those objects that I got rid of, are they actually gone?
No.
And how do you know that?
If you had layers, they'd still be there, or I bet you can hit oops and it's like Control Z, which brings them back.
Right, you can get them back, but the other thing is the only way to get them back is to do like an undo. Okay, so once they're gone, they're kind of gone, but you can bring them back as long as you're in the same session. But here's one thing that's important. If you save this drawing and close it and then open it back up, you're never going to retrieve them. They're gone. Okay, so once you save and close the file, okay, they're actually physically gone. So right now I can bring them back because I can just hit this guy right here called an undo, and notice it brings them back. But anything else that I did, it also brings that back too. So, you know, that's good and bad. I mean, if you delete something inadvertently, that's a good thing. Now, you also mentioned oops, okay? Oops does bring back an erase. Oops is basically an undo for an erase, and it only works. So this is an undo only for an erase, okay? And it only works one time, and it only works on the most recent erase. So let me show you kind of what I'm talking about there. So let's say I go out and I select these objects right here, and I delete them. And then I come over here and I draw a circle and I draw a rectangle, and I realize now that, I didn't want to delete this line here. I forgot that I deleted it, but I don't want that deleted. So if I do an undo, notice what it's going to do. It'll undo the rectangle, it'll undo the circle, and then it'll undo that back. So I got my line back, but I lost the other stuff that I did. Okay, does everybody see that? That's not a good thing. But let's look at this a little differently. If I delete this again, okay, I'm deleting it. And now I go in and draw my circle. And I do my rectangle. And I realize, yeah, I didn't really want that deleted. Now you can type in the word oops, and it only undoes the erase, but it leaves the other stuff in place. Okay. And oops will only, you can only do it once. Well, in other words, on the most recent erase. Okay. So it's a cool little tool. It undoes, it'll undo an erase, and it only works once. Okay. Any questions on that? And in the ribbon, you do have erase, but you don't have oops anywhere. They used to have it somewhere on the menu, but they don't have it there anymore. So it's almost like you have to know how to type it in, okay, if you're going to use it. Probably because most people are using undos, okay. All right, let's take a look at the, if there's no questions, I'll move on to the next commands. These are called the undo and the redo commands. So now most people are familiar with this concept because other programs also have them, but you got to be a little sure what it's doing. So we have the undo command in AutoCAD. Now you can also just use the U command, which is basically undo one step. Okay, this is probably one of the safest ways to do it because it's stepping you back one step at a time. With the undo command, you're going to get sub options. Okay, and I'll show you some of the sub options. You also have that little arrow on the ribbon that looks like that. That's an undo, and that will, just like this guy, that's an undo in this program. This is the same thing as you one step. Okay, so I either type in U and hit enter, or you can hit that little guy. Both of these are real convenient because they work one step at a time. The reverse of an undo is a redo. Okay, so you have redo, which is basically undoing an undo. Okay, an redo basically has options to go multiple steps redo rather, or you have that other arrow. Now you'll notice in AutoCAD, you don't have as many redos as you do undos. In fact, at one time in AutoCAD, you could only use this one time, but now you can do it multiple times depending on what's going on in your system, okay? So let's go over here, take a look at this. So up here, notice we have, this is your undo command. This is undo, and notice it says U. I don't know if you notice that there, but it says U. That U is one step at a time, okay? Now, if you open up this list right here, you'll notice, well, those are like in sets of instructions that I've issued. So if I want to undo back to that point, I just highlight what I want to, and then I can click on that. So I'll show you that here in a minute. Notice this is the redo, and there's nothing to redo at this point, and that happens too. So you don't always have redo available. Okay, so if you notice, if I just click on this, I'm just undoing one operation at a time. Okay, just one at a time. This is your safest way of doing undos. You can also just type in U at the keyboard and hit enter, U, enter, U, enter. So that's your safest way of doing things. Notice now that since I have done a couple of undos, now redo is available to me. So it will undo the undos. So I can go redo one step, 2 steps, 3 steps, or you can come here and you can say, I want to undo or redo everything. Okay. So you have, you can do multiple redos. So you kind of can go both ways. Okay. So if you type in the word undo, Basically, you can do a little bit more with it. So if I go undo here, type in undo, notice I get sub options, auto, control, we're not going to worry about those, or begin. But if you go back by a number, like that number 1, that's like an undo 1 step. So if I just type in enter, I just went back 1 step. If I type in 20, I went back 20 steps. Okay, so you can do it by the number of steps. And I would do back. You can also undo, notice if you do what's called an undo back, this will undo everything that you've done since you started this session. So if I say yes here, it undid my whole drawing. It completely undid everything. Now, if you had worked on this drawing before and opened it up as a separate file, what would happen is it couldn't undo stuff that you had done in your other session. So it can only undo stuff in your session. So undo back is obviously not a very smart thing. So I'm going to undo back to that. Whoops. All right, that brought it back. Okay, so there's another option in undo called a mark. So if I put a mark in here, what this does is puts I think of it like a dam, so it allows you to only go up to that point. It marks it. So if I do an undo mark, so what this allows me to do is now go out here and let's say, oh, I'm drawing a circle and I'm drawing a line. I'm just experimenting, just trying to see if this is what I want for my picture. So I do some work on it, and then I realize, you know, that's really not what I want. So I want to get rid of everything I did up to that mark. So what you can do is you can just go undo, and then you can go back. So instead of deleting everything, it just takes you back to that mark that you placed, that little marker, okay? So there's some really cool options in undo. The reality is most people probably are just going to use this arrow, do things one at a time, or you can come down in this list and you can do it as multiple undos, all right? And then of course you have the redo. Okay, any questions on those? Those are the erase, oops, undo, redo. Those are pretty straightforward. Any questions? You guys are easy. Okay, all right. So let's take a look at some really good ones. We're going to take a look at the move and copy, and then we're going to get into the offset, and we're going to do fillet. So these are the commands that I probably use every time I work in AutoCAD. I kind of call them my workhorse commands because they just do so much, and they're so important in how they function and what you do with them and those kind of things. So let's drop over here. We're going to take a look at move first. And copy will be very similar to move, okay? So once I explain move, then we'll kind of see how copy works. Okay, so first off, you need to understand that the alias for move is M. So this is really convenient because that allows me then to generate it really quickly. So move, what this does is allows me to move a line from one location to another. So what it's really doing, it's picking this line up and it's moving it from one location to another, okay? Now, what you should notice with move is that the way I've drawn it is that the angle of this line and the angle of this line is the same. So as this object is moving in space, it doesn't rotate, okay? So when that happens, move is actually doing what's called translating. So we call this process a translation. So move will do what's called a translation, okay? So what it's really doing is it's giving you a displacement vector in delta y and delta x to each point on that endpoints, those respective endpoints. Also, besides the fact that when it moves, this guy has, like, say, an angle of 60 degrees with respect to X, that'll also be 60. If this line is 5 inches long, this will still be 5 inches as well, okay? So move, when you translate it, you have two ways of doing it. You can move it from a base point to a displacement point, or you can move it by its displacement. So if I use a base point, typically I'm going to use a point on the object, so I might base point it right here. So that's where an O-snap might be critical. I might want to pick it up with an M point and move it to another point. So the first point that you establish in the move after you've selected your objects is called your base point, okay? You only have one base point. So it could be a midpoint, could be an end point, and it doesn't even have to be on the object. Then the second point you're going to take it to is just some other point. I'm going to just put it here. This would be called your displacement point. And again, that's where O-snaps are going to be really useful. And I'm going to show you how to use these. So that's the first option, base point to displacement point. The second option is if I know how much to displace it by, delta X and delta Y, this would be delta X, this would be delta Y, that's referred to as the displacement. So if you know delta X and you know delta Y, you can just type in the displacement. So you probably are going to use base point to displacement more often than you do this, just because, okay, the way it works. So again, we're going to do a move. It actually translates your objects, base point displacement, and then we're going to do it the secondary method, okay? So I'm going to go back to AutoCAD. So if you're following along with me and you got your screen all cluttered up, let's just type in E and hit enter, all, enter twice, we'll clean everything out. And so what we're going to do is we're going to draw two objects, okay? So I'm going to draw a line. Don't worry about how long it is or where it is. Just kind of put him over in the upper left-hand corner of the screen. And then I'm going to bring a circle down over here. And again, don't worry about his size. Don't worry about where he is because we've got O-snaps that are going to take care of all of that for us. So we're going to do the move. Now, again, on the ribbon, this is under the section called Modify, and that Modify panel, this is where a lot of this stuff over the next couple of weeks we're going to be talking about is, and a lot of stuff happens up here. Okay, this is where you do a lot of your work. So I'm going to move, and I'm going to do a verb noun selection. So I'm going to go to the move command first, and the move command is going to ask me to select objects. So in this case, I'm only going to move one object, but if I want to move multiple objects, I might use a crossing or a window or something like that, but I just want to move this line. So I'm going to highlight it and notice it says, okay, select objects. Well, I'm done selecting objects, so I'm going to terminate that selection set. In other words, tell it I'm done selecting objects just by hitting enter. Okay. So by doing that, now it moves into the base point displacement mode or the displacement. So notice it asked me to specify a base point. If I type in a displacement, I can either hit enter or just type it in. So what I want to do is I want to select the midpoint of this line. So I'm going to hit a shift, right click, midpoint, select the line, and notice now as I drag it, notice it's now in what's called drag mode state. And it's really showing me how it's going to displace. And notice it's not rotating and it's not changing size. So it is not rotating and it is not scaling. So now it wants to know the second point of the displacement. So I'm going to hit a shift, right click, center, select that circle. And what I did was I moved that thing perfectly from where it was. And so the midpoint of the line now coincides directly with the center of that circle. And that's an extremely powerful command right there. We use moves constantly, okay? Does anybody want to see that again?
Nope.
Okay, picking it up all right?
I think so.
Okay, so you notice, everybody, that this guy didn't rotate, right? Okay, that's important to understand. Okay, I'm gonna undo it and just redo it real quick again, just to make sure. Okay, so again, I went into the move command, selected my object. When I was done selecting objects, I have to hit enter to terminate the selection set. Now it wants to know the base point. I'm going to hit a shift right click to hit the midpoint of this guy. It's translating now. I'm going to hit a shift right click to center. And there's my circle with my line. Okay? So now we're going to look at what we call the displacement option. So again, you're probably going to do a base point to a displacement way more often than this other method. The other method says, I know how much I want to move this in terms of X and in terms of Y. So if that's the case, I can just type those values in. So what I'm going to do is go to move. This time I'm going to select both things to translate. Once I've selected everything, I'm just going to hit enter. So you can just select displacement if you want, or you can just type in the numbers, but either way, what it's doing, notice how it's translating. What it's asking me for is an X and a Y and a Z displacement. Now, you don't use the @ symbol. It's relative to the object. It already knows that, even though it doesn't look like it is. So I'm going to type in -10 in the X, comma, +5 in the Y. And notice what it did is it moved it over 10 units this way and up 5 units like that. And if you did that, it may have zipped out of your screen view because it might have been, it depends on what your zoom is. Did everybody see how that worked?
Yep.
Used way less often, okay? You're just not going to use it as much because you're going to know where you want to take things from to, okay? And so we use this all the time as an option. This is a move, like I said, you're going to use it a lot. So let's contrast that with copy. So when we look at this, copy does exactly the same thing that the move does. It'll translate. It'll do the base point displacement option, or it'll do just the displacement. The difference is with copy is that it will leave this object behind and then it makes another copy. Okay, so with move, the location of that object is no longer there. It's in a new location. With copy, the original's still there, and you get a new object. So this is a convenient one to use as well. So if we want to make this as a copy, we go to copy, which is right below it. And by the way, the alias on copy is CO, because you might remember the alias for a circle is C. So if you type in C, you're going to get circle command. So if I go to copy, it'll look exactly like move essentially. So it says select objects. I'm going to go ahead and select my objects. Okay. When I'm done selecting, I have to terminate the selection set. I just hit enter. Then it wants to know base point or displacement. And there's also what's called a mode setting on this. So you can actually have it delete the original if you want under the mode setting. We're going to leave that alone. I'm going to give the base point as the center of that circle. So I'm going to hit a shift, right click, grab center. And notice now it just lets me place objects all over the place. And I could snap to other objects if I wanted to, but I'm just eyeballing these in. When you're done selecting all the objects that you want, you just hit enter. So notice all of these guys are copies, and that was the original. So again, it's no different, except you get copies, and you get your original left behind. And one of the things to remember in AutoCAD, this is a good thing to keep in the back of your mind. If you're drawing anything twice, you're doing it the wrong way. So what that's saying is, hey, if you've got something that you can copy it, because that's going to be way more advantageous and it's going to be a quicker way of going. Okay, did everybody get that to work? Just like move, it's a translation. Okay, so I'm going to undo back. And I'm going to show you how displacement works with copy. So the difference between base point and displacement is that base point you can do multiple copies. With displacement you can only do one. So if I go into copy, again, select my objects. When I'm done selecting, I just hit enter. Going to go into displacement mode, and I'm going to tell it I want to go, let's say we're going to go 5 units in the X, comma -5 in the Y. Okay, just hit those. It went over 5 and down 5. So notice it let me do that one time, and then it drops you out of the copy command. And again, just like move, you probably won't know as much about your displacement value as you do by base point displacement. So you're going to tend to want to use the first option more than the second. Okay. Any questions on move, copy? We're okay? All right. So we got 2 more we want to take a look at. I might go ahead and look at chamfer with you too, because we're running in really good time. So we're doing it at this a great time. So I'm gonna look at offset first, then fillet, then chamfer. So let's go back here and take a look at this. So again, like move, we use move for a lot of things in AutoCAD. We're going to use the offset command for a lot of things as well. So we're going to look at offset first. And the alias for offset is O, so that's also very convenient. So what offset does is if you have an object out there, let's say like a line like this, okay, you can offset that line like that. So anything that you offset, it's going to be parallel to the object it's coming from. It's also going to be the same size. So these would be the original lines. These would be the offset lines, and what you're going to provide for it is the distance. Okay, so this would be the distance that you're offsetting, and then you need to know the side. So in this case, you'd either look at the left side or the right side of that object. Okay, so you have your distance, and then your side. Okay. Now each object will offset a little bit differently. So lines, this is a perpendicular offset, okay, perpendicular. So that means this is coming out 90 degrees. That distance, if you're measuring, let's say this is 5 units, this would be 5 units measured perpendicular, because that could make a difference if you're measuring it that way, 5 units, okay? So it's always perpendicular. If you have an arc or a circle, now what it does with an arc or a circle, it's a little different. So let's say I've got a circle. When I offset that circle, it offsets it radially. I can't, this is gonna be hard to do, guys. I don't know if I'll be able to do it. Yeah, that's what I thought. I can't, never mind. It'll offset it, it offsets it out. Whoops, I'm still in that mode. It offsets it out or in based on the distance. So it's going to offset it like this, or it's going to offset it like this, but it offsets it radially. So you're going to get a circle like out here. These 2 circles will share the same center point, and that's called a concentric circle. So these circles will be concentric to each other. And this distance then is a radial distance. Okay, so let's take a look at offset. Now offset's, again, one of those commands extremely useful. Let's go ahead and we'll just erase everything, because I want you to draw or follow me. I'm going to do a couple different types of objects. So I'm going to erase all and then hit enter twice. So I want to show you the difference between some objects, how this works. First of all, I'm going to draw a couple of lines. I'm going to draw a series of lines. Looks like that. And I'm going to draw a polyline that kind of mimics it. And we want to notice how these guys offset differently, because there's quite a bit of difference in how a polyline offsets. And then I'm going to offset an arc, and a circle would offset the same way, just kind of so you get the idea. So every object that we've looked at can be offset except the point. Okay, so we've looked at lines, polylines, arcs, circles, rectangles, polygons, and donuts. Those can all be offset. but the point cannot be offset. Every object that we've looked at, every object can be moved or copied. So that's one of the, so there's a little bit of a difference in those. So we find offset, again, we could just type in O and grab the offset, but we could also just grab it right here. So this is the easiest place to get to it. So we do the offset. So it has some sub options: specify distance, through point, erase, or layer. Now we're gonna just look at through point and distance, but the first thing I want to do is give it a distance. So I'm going to come down here and I'm going to give it a distance of 1. So that's the perpendicular distance it's going to use. And then it says, okay, select the object. So you select the object to offset, and then you just show it the side. Come over, that's the left side or the right side. So if I come over here, it offsets. Then I come here, it offsets. And then I come here, it offsets. Okay? So these guys are, that's 1 inch or 1 unit, 1 unit, and 1 unit. And it makes a direct copy. So notice the endpoints of that line, copy there, and the endpoints of that. So these guys aren't coming together. Okay, so that's kind of a downside. And these guys aren't coming together either. In fact, they'd need to be trimmed. And we haven't talked about trim yet, so we couldn't really just erase that piece out of there, or we can't extend those yet. In fact, I'm going to show you how to do that tonight. So there's kind of a downside when you're using lines. Now watch what happens when we use the P line. This will respond differently because it's one object. If I go into the offset command, and by the way, once I have created an offset distance, it remembers that distance. So you have to pay attention to that, because if you want it changed, you have to change it. So I'm going to just leave it at 1, and then I'm going to just select my polyline, and then come over here and show it the side, and notice what it does, a lot different. Now if I go to the inside, again, really nice, okay? So the polyline functions really differently. Now let's look at what happens with the arc. Arc is a radial offset, so I can keep going out, or I can go in, I can go in, and I can go in, and I won't be able to do it one more time because that one can't be concentric. But all of these arcs, notice, have the same center point. You notice every time I click on them, they're all lined up right there. That's your center point. So those arcs are all concentric, and the distance radially measured out from that blue dot to that blue dot is 1 inch, 1 inch, 1 inch, or 1 inch, 1 inch, 1 inch. Okay. So that's how we would utilize the offset. Very powerful. If you've got parallel objects, like let's say you're building a floor plan or something, with a lot of parallel lines, wall lines, offset, you draw one outside line and you just offset things in, offset things out. It's a really powerful command. And so let's take a look at the option through, okay? So let me do some stuff. So let's say I have a circle out here, and I want to offset this polyline so that the polyline goes through the center of the circle. Now, I literally just eyeballed this circle in here, so I don't have a clue what the distance is from that point to that point measured perpendicular. But AutoCAD can figure that out for you using what's called a through point. So what I'm going to do is go into the offset command and choose through. So what you do is you select the object, and notice now it kind of follows your cursor, okay? Because it's looking for the through point. Well, if I wanted to go directly through the center of that circle, I'm going to hit a shift, right click, grab center, and hit that. So what it's done is it calculated that exact distance it needed to put that in. So I use both of those options pretty much. Probably use the distance option more than I use the through point, but through point is really powerful. A lot of people don't get a handle on that. They're always used to just putting in a distance, okay? Let me also show you something about offset that's really important. Well, here's what a lot of people do is when they get into this, they don't pay attention to what's going on down here. And let's say if you're looking for a distance, they pick 2 points. That just measured the distance. So then when I start doing offsets, it's automatically going the distance that I chose by those 2 points. So you have to be really careful, okay? When you're using offset, always pay attention to what mode it's in first. And if you want to change your distances, make sure you type them in. That's probably a better way of doing it, okay? So that's your offset command. Again, the alias is O, a great tool. Any questions on that? Okay. So let's take a look at, this is probably one of my favorite commands because it's going to do 3 things for you if you execute this right, okay? This is called the fillet command. So the fillet, first off, has an alias of F, okay? So you want to know that. So a fillet will do one of 3 things. It'll generate a true fillet for you, which I'll explain what that is here in a minute, or it will extend, or it will trim, depending on what you do this for, or how you have it set. So a fillet, let's just look at that by definition. A fillet is where you have 2 objects that come together, such as this, and you want to now round them with a corner. I don't know how easily I'm going to be able to do this, but let's say like that, okay? This would be called your fillet, and then what it does is it trims this piece off and that piece off. So right there, that's your fillet right there. And that fillet is based on a radius. So you're going to supply for it. When you do a fillet, you're going to give it a radius value of something. So if you want to extend or trim, your radius is going to be set to 0, okay? But if you set it to something other than 0, what it's going to do is it's going to fillet this. Now, I told you, when we started way back a couple weeks ago, the arc command was a very hard command to use because you need to make sure that you get that thing perpendicular and all that good stuff. Well, this is the command that we're going to now use instead of the arc, because it gives you a totally tangent situation, and you can just define the radius really easily, okay? But it does 3 things. It either fillets, it extends, or it trims, depending on what your settings of your radius are set to. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. I'm going to go ahead and clean my screen up. Like I said, if you're following me, you can just type in erase all, enter twice, okay? And I'm going to do a zoom extents. All right, so I'm going to draw some objects here. And if you're following me, you might want to do this too. Lines. I'm going to do a line from here to here, and then here to here. And then I'm going to do a line from here to here. I'm going to do another line like this, like that. Okay, so it doesn't have to look perfect. Now I'm using lines, but I want you to understand you can fillet a line to an arc, you can fillet circle to circle, you can fillet P lines, so you can fillet just about every object we've talked about with the exception of a point. And some of them are going to look a little different how they function. So the fillet is right above this guy called array, and he also has another one underneath him. One called chamfer and one called blend curves. We're going to take a look at chamfer here in a minute, but fillet is what we're using here. And again, remember your alias is F, so you can just type in F and grab it. And I do that all the time because it's real convenient. So I'm going to go to fillet. So it does have several sub options: undo, polyline, radius, trim, or multiple. So it's set right now to do what's called a trim mode, and that's typically what you want it set to. So that's important. The radius currently is 0. So what I said about the 0 is it's going to function like a trim or an extend if I've got 0. And here's the other thing you have to be careful with. Even though that says 0 there, doesn't mean it's exactly 0. Because remember, this display right now is only set to 4 decimal places. I could have a number out there in the 5th or the 6th or the 7th decimal place that I'm not seeing, And what'll happen is that I'll get a tiny little fillet that occurs, and I've had that happen, by the way. So you need to be careful. Okay, if I'm going to choose a 0, I'm going to actually choose a 0 just to make sure. So the first thing we're going to do is go in and set a radius, and that's always usually your first step with fillet command. So the radius I'm going to use is something greater than 0. I'm going to make my fillet radius 1. So what I'm going to do now is just select the two objects I want to fillet together. That would be this guy. And I'm going to come over here. And notice when I select the other object, it shows me how it's going to fillet. So before I actually do the fillet, before I commit to it, I can just see it. If I like what I see, then I can just left click it. And notice what it did is it put that's a nice tangent arc right there. It's tangent to that line, it's tangent to that line, and it's exactly 1 inch big. And there's no reason to ever use the arc command again. Okay, so
I'm having trouble
with
that. I'm having trouble with that at the moment. So I have the fillet. I put the radius to 1.
Okay.
And I've hit enter, and then I'm clicking on the first triangle, and it's not going to select second object or shift select to apply a corner or radius.
You're in fillet?
Yeah.
Okay, let me back. We'll just step through, okay, real quick.
I mean, I know how to do it,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't know what is wrong. It says fillet radius is too large.
Oh, well, that's what's wrong. Okay, it can't fit the fillet in based on what your vertex is.
Okay.
You don't have enough. So what you can do is try setting your fillet radius to, what did you use, 1, did you say?
Yeah.
Try setting it down to like 0.25. Just to see if that works. Okay. So yeah, if for instance, if I went here and I set my radius to, let's say 20 or 10, I bet mine's going to be too big too. Yeah, and that's what it's telling me. It's too big.
Okay.
Did it work now?
Yes, it did.
Yeah. So if you get that, it can't fit it in here is what's happening. Okay. And it's not going to like second guess it. So that's the one thing about it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set mine to a value that does work. And I'm going to go ahead and fill it. Okay. Anybody else questions? That was a really good question, actually, Ian, because that does happen. Okay. So let's see how the trim works and the fill and the extend when you're using fillet. That's really cool because, again, this is like you get like 3 commands out of 1, which is really nice. So we're going to go into fillet again, but this time notice it remembers my radius. What I'm going to do is choose radius, and I'm going to set my radius to 0. And I'm going to come here. Now, here's the thing to remember with fillet trims or extends. What you select is what it's going to keep. So I'm going to select this line first. If I come here, it wants to keep that line. So if I want to come here, I can keep that line. So again, it shows you before you commit, which is pretty cool. So I'm going to come here and click on that guy. And notice what it did is it nicely trimmed it. Now again, if you had a really, really teeny small radius, you could actually have a little arc in there. And I've had that happen. That's why you want to make sure if you're using 0, you want to place a 0 in there. Okay. Any questions anybody has on that? Let's do an extend. This one's going to do an extend and a trim. Watch what will happen here. So I'm going to go to fillet. I know that the radius is 0, so I don't have to do anything. I'm just going to pick this guy, and now I'm going to pick that guy. And he did a trim and an extend to make that guy work, which is really cool. Okay. So fillet puts a nice fillet arc, gives you a nice tangent arc. It's set at some radius. Or you can trim, or you can extend, or you can kind of do both in one operation. It's really so cool the way it works. Any questions? Okay, so let's add a polyline into the mix. I want you to draw a polyline. We're going to just draw a polyline kind of like this. So we can polyline those options. There's a polyline option. So if I go to fillet, notice there's a polyline option. If I choose polyline, okay, what it's going to do is it's going to want me to give a radius. So I'm going to choose a radius. I'm not going to make it too big, maybe 0.25. So when I select the polyline, it automatically puts a little fillet radius at each vertex, but it's the same value, okay? So this is kind of like what the rectangle command was doing when we used the fillet command section of that, all right? It put them together. Okay, everybody get that to work? That's probably not too incredibly useful because a lot of times I don't want the same radius on a polyline. So that may not be as useful to me. So what I can do, and this is kind of cool, if you fillet this polyline to this line, watch what'll happen here. I'm going to go into fillet. I'm going to change my radius to 1. I'm not going to select the polyline option. I'm just going to select this polyline and this line. And notice it did that. But what it also did is it added that arc to the polyline and it added that line to the polyline. So that now got added or joined into the polyline by the way I filleted it. So polylines are kind of unique. They used to be tricky when they would, in fact, they didn't like to fillet, but now they fillet pretty nicely the way they work. So you can have all of the vertexes have the same radius, or you can have them all have separate ones. It just depends on how you use it. Okay. Any questions anybody has on this? This is pretty good stuff. And this is, we're going to be utilizing this stuff on our third assignment. And you can see now, with the tools that I just gave you, you could go back and draw that first assignment really quick, utilizing some of these tools we were just talking about, the O-snaps and those kind of things now. In fact, if you had a chance and you wanted to redraw that first assignment, you might see that it would go really quick using these tools. Any questions?
Nope.
Okay. So we're going to take a look at one more. I said I wasn't going to do it, but I think I am going to do it because we got plenty of time. I'm going to take a look at the chamfer command. So the chamfer is kind of like the fillet. It really is very similar, as a matter of fact, except of how it works. So let me just explain now. Let me get rid of this. Let's see. Oh, I'll just redo that. Just be easier to get a new file. Okay, so chamfer. Chamfer is the command that we're gonna. So the command is chamfer. And a chamfer is kind of like a fillet, but it's a little different in what it does. It gives you, let's say, if I've got a line coming up and a line coming down, instead of putting an arc, what it will do is it'll put a straight line across like that, and then it will trim this piece off, and then it'll trim that piece off. Okay. So what it does is it first finds that corner if that corner doesn't exist, and then it measures back a distance. Okay, so this would be our first distance. And this would be the second distance from that corner. So the distances don't have to be equal. So you can think of this as distance 1 and distance 2. Distance 1 does not have to equal distance 2. Okay, now they can equal each other, but they don't have to. Okay, so you can be equal or not equal, but you can't have 1 0 and 1 some value. Okay, so you have to have 2 valid distances. Okay, if you have this set to 0 and this set to 0, which is valid, then what you're going to do is get an extender, a trim with the chamfer. Okay, so other than that, then it's going to be really similar to the way it does with fillet. Okay, so let's take a look at that. Excuse me. So I'm going to just delete all this stuff I've got here. I'm going to do a similar drawing. So I'm going to draw a couple lines. Now, the one thing about chamfer as opposed to the fillet, chamfers are used a whole lot less than fillets. In fact, if you look around your room, you'll see fillets all over the place. If you look around your house or your room, you won't see as many chamfers. In fact, it might be really hard to find any. So from a design standpoint, we use fillets a whole lot more. So chamfer is located right under fillet. The alias, I believe, is CHA. I think it's, or just CH. And notice it looks really similar, except you have distance 1 and distance 2. So what we're going to do is the first thing we're going to go into distance. So for distance 1, I'm going to place a value of 1. And for distance 2, I'm going to place a value of 2. So what makes the difference with 1 and 2 is if I pick this guy first, it's going to use distance 1 here. So this is going to be, notice that's distance 1, distance 2. Okay, so if I want that reversed, I would have to choose this guy first and then that guy second. Okay, so there is an order. The order in the way you pick, the first object you select is the one it's going to use for distance 1. So notice if I select that, it trimmed that off and it added that segment. Again, you go back into chamfer, you got that and you got that. So if you want to trim or extend, you would have to set both objects or both variables, distance 1 and distance 2 would have to both be set to zeros. And then at that point, you can do the extend or trim. I think if you're going to do that, I would use fillet because fillet's a whole lot easier to use. That's my opinion. Okay. Any questions on fillet? I'm sorry, chamfer. Chamfer also has a polyline option. So again, if you had polylines with a lot of vertexes in them, I'm just going to draw me a kind of a quick vertexy thing like that. If I go into the chamfer command and I go to the polyline option, select my polyline, and it just chamfers. Now you'll notice some it couldn't chamfer. Let's see, so it just didn't. If it couldn't chamfer them, it didn't do it. So it didn't chamfer all of them. So you can see it chamfered that one, it couldn't do that one, did that one. So that's how that works. Again, I don't use chamfer as much. You just don't see it as much, but it's, I maybe probably some disciplines do, but from my standpoint and the things I do, I get into that a lot less. Okay, any questions? That was all we wanted to cover for tonight. And I will go ahead and get this recording stopped, and then we'll take and get that set up for you guys. So let me go ahead and stop that recording.